Welcome to First and Goal for the NFL season for Week 11. It's unbelievable how far we are already this season. But we're back again, First and Goal for Week 11, as always, presented by Rosters.com. If you have not signed up on Rosters.com yet, please be sure to do so. And if you use promo code CURVE, you can get an instant $20 on your initial $10 deposit. So deposit $10, end up with $30 account. You can't beat that. For those of you that have tuned in, for those of you that haven't, welcome. For each week, Adam Piper and I, the other guy there, you can see that's Adam, we will bring you guys our first thoughts on the NFL slate. Sometimes the first thoughts are the best. This way it gets you into the researching mode and gets you a chance to look at all the games in a little bit of a micro perspective, trying to figure out what the best matchups are, what we're targeting, things of that nature. So that's what we're going to do in a little bit. But before we get into that, let's touch on Week 10. A few things happened last week, especially with the chalk that I don't want to say are completely surprising, but some things did change. So, Adam, before we get into that, how you doing? You ready for Week 11?
Yeah, I'm waiting for it to just not be week 11 and wake up and it's like week 4, but that's not gonna happen. So, yeah, it's weird. The season you wait for it to come by and then it's week 1 and then all of a sudden you're in week 11. It's crazy.
Yeah, I can kind of remember updating everything for the first week of the season like it was yesterday, and now all of a sudden there's only 5 or 6 weeks left in the regular season. Then we have playoffs. It feels like it's kind of flown by a lot quicker this year compared to others.
Yeah.
So let's dive into Week 10 a little bit, because when the week started last week, everybody was like, you know what, just put David Johnson in your lineups right away. And he had a good day. The problem is he wasn't running back one. There were some other guys ahead of him. Ezekiel Elliott was unreal. When I mean unreal, Adam will throw some stats at you. The guy wasn't touched for 129 yards of his touchdowns against the Steelers. He was running back one. Running back two was Le'Veon Bell, who was just as good, finally scored a touchdown. And then running back three, just like we all predicted, right, Adam? Ryan Matthews for the Eagles.
Go to hell. No, not really. I like Ryan Matthews, so if he's watching this, just kidding. But Doug Peterson can just stop talking now. Just don't do press conferences anymore. We're good.
Yeah, so when he says Sproles is the lead back, it means Matthews is the lead back. But when it says Matthews is the lead back, it means Sproles is the lead back. So this week, count Wendell Smallwood in for 35 touches.
Yeah, he's a lock. Play him on DraftKings again. Even against Seattle, he's going for 28 carries for 48 yards and 3 touchdowns.
If you can't sense the sarcasm there, you will realize that is a big part of Adam and I's personality, so we will start with that. But let's talk about quarterbacks last week. I know your best friend in the whole world. You may not know that yet, but Marcus Mariota was good again. What is this, his 8th game with multi-touchdowns now?
Yeah, Matt Ryan only had 1 touchdown against the Eagles, so Marcus Mariota now leads the NFL in games of multiple touchdown passes. He's the GOAT. Doesn't matter. They might win that division, Tennessee. But yeah, I'm gonna keep playing him, especially this week. We'll get into that. But he's been pretty good, especially in the red zone. And since week 5, it's Brady, it's Breeze, and Mariota in terms of fantasy points per game. So he's had incredible matchups pretty much every week outside of the first couple weeks of the season. But I'm going to keep playing him. He's been incredible.
Yeah, the crazy part is he's never up there with those guys in price. Now, I don't think anybody could ever really argue why in terms of the quote-unquote talent level, but when you look at production, he's right there with those guys, as you mentioned. This week, he's 6,700 on DraftKings, 1,000 less than Drew Brees, 1,200 less than Tom Brady, 1,300 less than Cam Newton, who plays on Thursday night. So it's one of these situations where he probably will be the chalk again, because that price is just too low considering his floor and his ceiling of late, really.
Yeah, he's literally been a top 3 quarterback since week 5, and he hasn't been priced like it right now, at least because it would change if the Thursday night game wasn't featuring Cam and Breeze, but on the main slate, he's quarterback 5 in price, so it's getting a little bit up there, but he's still relatively well under 7K. So, and another good matchup. You don't got to ask me who I'm playing this week. I'm playing him, and I'm playing another quarterback I'm pretty fond of.
Yeah, we will talk about quarterbacks relatively shortly. Before we get into that, real quick, let's touch on the pass catchers from Week 10. Antonio Brown was great, an excellent game, a great game to stack those Steelers with Big Ben and himself, Antonio Brown. Doug Baldwin caught 3 touchdowns, I believe it was. Jordy Nelson had a nice game, and your boy Allen Robinson stepped up. He had a nice catch in the end zone on probably Blake Bortles' only good throw of his entire season.
Bro. Yeah, dude, just watch if you can somehow get I know Matt Harmon will probably do this because he's the Allen Robinson whisperer. I'm sure he knows this better than anybody, but if you watch the throws to Allen Robinson from Blake Bortles, I have to say 80% of them Allen Robinson has to dive and go full extension to even make the catch. It's been brutal. He could have had monster games in back-to-back weeks if Bortles wasn't Blake Bortles, and it's funny because I love Blake Bortles this week. So,
yeah, it's one of those situations where we wish that we had a different quarterback for Allen Robinson from a talent perspective, but he's going to get the volume either way. So, kind of a catch-22 there. At tight end, wasn't too much to look at in Week 10. Delaney Walker had an excellent game. Cameron Brate caught what seemed like a 900-mile-an-hour fastball in the end zone from Jameis Winston. And Kyle Rudolph has a nice game as well. So tight ends last week wasn't necessarily a hot spot for fantasy points.
Yeah, you didn't really have the elite tight ends in good spots, and it kind of showed. Graham and Gronk didn't do much. Greg Olsen didn't do much. Delaney Walker was the only one I was looking at in that top tier, and he delivered on a touchdown catch from DeMarco Murray, not Marcus Mariota. But yeah, tight end was rough last week. So if you got anything from your tight end, you're probably sitting pretty good.
Absolutely. Now let's dive into what everybody's here for. Week 11 in NFL DFS. This is what everybody's talking about. So let's get started. Thursday night, the New Orleans Saints at the Carolina Panthers. It's a huge game for implication in that division because nobody seems to want to win it. The Falcons are struggling. We know about the Bucs. Both these teams have been struggling recently too. And the Saints kind of had a game taken from them last week. If you look at the play on that 2-point conversion, or I guess PAT conversion, that turned into 2 points for the Denver Broncos as they stepped out of bounds. But regardless, it happened, and this is one of these games where both teams have to win to stay alive in that divisional race. But for DFS purposes, I think this is one of those games, if you are playing the Thursday slate, you have to target. Adam, why do you think that is?
Well, first of all, you get the Saints bump. So that's I mean, granted, they've been not historically bad, if you want to be polite. There's been defenses that have been worse this season, I think, at least against the pass. So, but yeah, Carolina's been so bad lately. So if you're playing this Thursday slate, you got to think Cam is arguably the number one quarterback of the entire slate of NFL games this week. We know that the Saints blitz a ton. I believe they're top 5 in blitz rate, but that's because they don't generate pressure otherwise. So if they're going to blitz again here, I know Carolina's offensive line has been bad, but this is kind of a good spot for them because the Saints generate zero pressure. And if they blitz and do get behind, Cam's going to be able to step up and run. So against a team that really, they've been giving up more work against the run, but it doesn't mean they're necessarily great against the pass. So, yeah, I think Cam's in a great spot here against the Saints. They give up rushing touchdowns at a large percentage. Over 41% of their touchdowns allowed have come against the run. And, I think they still lead the league. Nope, San Francisco, Washington, and San Diego all allow 1.4 rushing touchdowns per game. The Saints are right there at 1.3. So, yeah, you got to think Cam's in a good spot here. What do you think about Breeze? Because we know Breeze on the road is a little bit different, but he's had road games where he's been outstanding. I mean, and this is a spot where the Saints probably won't be able to run the football, and Breeze will be exploiting a bad secondary that's been struggling this year. And he's been over or at least at 20 fantasy points, and I think all but 2 games this season. So he's been pretty much a lock. So I'm not worried about Drew Brees on the road either.
No, not at all. That is correct that you just mentioned of the fact that Drew Brees is at under 20 fantasy points in just 2 games. They came in week 4 and week 2. But here's how I look at Drew Brees. Last week against Denver, who is a historically good defense, The guy had 303 yards with 2 touchdowns. I mean, I know he had 2 interceptions, but regardless, the guy scored 26 DraftKings points. He threw the ball 29 times for 300 yards against the Denver secondary. That is very good. Now, if you look back to the other game against Carolina this year, some of you guys may remember, Drew Brees threw for 465 and 4 touchdowns. Now, that was at home, but against the same secondary with relatively similar players, you got to think that he's in play again this week. So on Thursday nights, I think either quarterback is worth using. That's for sure.
Yeah. And then Jonathan Stewart, particularly on FanDuel, he crushed New Orleans last time they played for multiple touchdowns. And the only thing is, like, when Jonathan Stewart first came back, that was kind of around the time where Cam was coming back from the concussion. So they were giving Stewart a lot of the short yardage and goal line work. And the last 2 weeks, we've seen Cam run the ball more. But Carolina has 49 run plays this season in the red zone to 46 passes. So they're about balanced, but still, most teams are passing more in the red zone anyway. So, Carolina, once they get in the 5, it's going to be Cam, it's going to be Stewart. So I like Jonathan Stewart against a team that allows a lot of rushing touchdowns. And then I get, Greg Olsen. He's a great play as well. Kelvin Benjamin's a fine play. And then I guess the real question is, who do you like on the Saints more? We know Cooks is a lot worse on the road. I think he's like 7 or 6 fantasy points per game better at home than on the road. We know Michael Thomas has kind of emerged. He had a bad game last week with, I think, 2 fumbles, but it's not like he's going to get benched or anything. Should have a good matchup and continues to see the red zone usage. So, I think I probably would prefer Michael Thomas. I would imagine he's still cheaper than Brandon Cooks. On DraftKings, he is. Wow, I'm still scrolling. I haven't even seen him yet. Let me just type his name in.
He's 6,600 and Cooks is 7,000. So.
Oh, I just realized I'm not looking at the Thursday slates. That's why I can find him. But yeah, so I'd rather play Michael Thomas.
Yeah, I wish that this game was on the main slate, and of course a lot of people do, because I love Michael Thomas this week. I know he lost both of those fumbles against Denver, but when you go back and look at that game, and I watched a lot of that game, they had 2 plays drawn up for him inside the 5, but both plays ended up going to Willis Snead, who was actually the second progression for Drew Brees on that play. So I was not concerned at all about Michael Thomas last week. He had a tough matchup anyway, and he actually drew a lot of targets, and he was supposed to be the first read on 2 red zone plays. So I don't think it was one of those issues where he's going to get benched a little bit because of the fumbles. There's no reason for them to do that. And even on the last drive before he lost that last fumble, they trusted him on the first play. So I don't think he's a guy that's going to be losing trust in the eyes of Sean Payton or Drew Brees at all. So I'm definitely comfortable with him this week.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a lot of passing from Brees in this game. So, yeah, I prefer Michael Thomas. You can play Cooks in tournaments if you want, but I would, he crushed them at home because their secondary is so bad, and I think he had like a 95-yard touchdown against them. So you can play him. I just prefer Thomas, especially because you can save a couple $100 and probably the same or at least a little bit more usage, at least higher percentage usage, because they're both all 3 receivers are seeing very close in terms of targets in the season, but Thomas is leading the team in red zone usage. So.
Exactly. Now, that was a lot of players to talk about for a Thursday game. First time that's happened this year, and it's good because the NFL needs a good Thursday game. Now, let's move on to the Sunday slate, the slate that everybody will be playing. The first game here is actually one of my favorites. Tennessee Titans travel to Indianapolis to face the Colts. DeMarco, Mariota, Delaney Walker, right? That's the story of this game, Adam?
Yeah, I'm playing Mariota everywhere again. So very quietly, kind of the Titans lead the NFL in touchdown conversion rate in the red zone. Mariota's been incredible in his career in the red zone. He has 0 turnovers inside the red zone for his career. I think he has close to 30 touchdown passes. So he's been outstanding. And the Colts are allowing 3.8 red zone scoring attempts per game. That's bottom 5 in the NFL. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity for Mariota to score touchdowns again. I think multiple touchdown passes could be in his wheelhouse for the 9th game this season. So he's right there. He's a top 5 quarterback, maybe even top 3 for me. I mean, there's a lot of studs in good spots this week. It's kind of the opposite of last week. You have Brady against San Fran, Big Ben against Cleveland. I love Luck in this game. So Mariota, I think, I'm going to have so much exposure to him again. And then I don't know how you can get away from DeMarco Murray. He's been incredible. The use has been incredible. He's even throwing passes now. And the Colts, they miss a lot of tackles. They're right there with the Bucs and the Niners in terms of missed tackles this season. They're slow at linebacker, so I like DeMarco a lot too. But again, like he's going to be interesting because you have Le'Veon at 8,800 against Cleveland, Zeke at 8,000, who's been incredible, but he gets Baltimore. David Johnson at 7,900, and then DeMarco 8,200. So he's expensive, but he's in a great spot. And then Delaney, we're kind of seeing the other passing options in Tennessee, other than Rashard Matthews, who now has 6 touchdowns in his last 6 games. Kind of fade out. Tasha Sharp finally scored last week, but that was kind of a broken play. So I think Delaney Walker and Jordan Reed are the top 2 tight ends this week because Gronk not looking like he's going to play.
Yeah, I'm with you on basically every play from this game. I do think this is one of those situations where you can use the entire offense again. We saw it last week against the Packers where the Titans scored 47 points.
I'm going to stack this game 100%. I'm going to have
exactly.
I'm going to have Mariota. I might have a lineup with Mariota, Murray, Delaney, and then Moncrief, Hilton maybe. And then I'll have a lineup with Luck in it too because I love Luck. Tennessee's allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game. He had his 2nd best game against the Titans this season. And this is a game where the Titans kind of funnel offenses to pass more. They're allowing around 38 pass attempts per game. Actually, it's probably higher now after the horrible game from the Packers last week. So, yeah, I love Luck. I love playing Andrew Luck. He's never highly owned, and I don't think he will be this week with all these studs in great spots like I talked about.
Yeah, no question. The one thing about Luck is, like you said, he's always under-owned. And considering he's only $500 more than Mariota and in the same price range as some of those other quarterbacks, he definitely will be, and I can say this with 100% confidence, he will be low-owned. There's no doubt about that. So a kind of a contrarian stack for this game, which I do think will be the case with everybody on Tennessee. Look at Luck and Moncrief, look at Luck and Hilton, maybe in Luck and Dwayne Allen. But I think Luck and those 2 receivers is number 1 and number 2 are an excellent play in tournaments.
Yeah, opposing offenses are averaging 38.6 pass attempts per game against Tennessee this season. It's one of the highest numbers in the league. So I love this game. I love pretty much anybody in this game. I love Moncrief, T.Y. Hilton. I would believe that Hilton might see more of Parrish Cox, but Hilton plays in the slot a little bit too. So either way, like Jordy Nelson destroyed the secondary last week. Moncrief has been outstanding. Anytime that Andrew Luck is under center, Dante Moncrief has been just like quietly one of the better touchdown producers in the NFL. He's got 8 touchdowns in his last 9 or 10 games with Luck under center. So, yeah, he's not going to cost you a whole lot either. And he doesn't have the upside of T.Y. Hilton, but at 6,100, he could score twice in this game. It wouldn't surprise me at all. I think this game, I mean, look at the total. It's actually has a higher total than the New Orleans-Carolina game. It's at 53 right now. So,
yeah, absolutely. It's one of those games where I don't think a lot of people think of Tennessee being in games with high-flying offenses and a lot of scoring, but that's been evident all year. So the next game I have here is actually the reason why I'm wearing a Lions jersey. I don't think a lot of you thought that I had that. But the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Detroit Lions. This is number 9, Matt Stafford. He is one of my favorite plays this week because this is why. Ready? A lot of people in the price range of $6,700 are just going to use Mariota, and that'll be the end of it. For $100 cheaper, you can get Matthew Stafford, who I think is an excellent pivot for Mariota in tournaments because he gets this Jacksonville game. Now, you know Jacksonville's going to have to throw the ball a lot to catch up with the Lions. You know the Lions have to throw to run because they can't run between the tackles. Just one of those situations where I think Stafford is far too cheap, and coming off the bye, you always know that ownership is going to be lower anyway because of the natural recency bias in DFS. So to me, this is a game where I think Stafford could be an excellent asset to your fantasy offense in DFS and in seasonal for those of you that have to make decisions coming off a bye, whether to drop a guy or start a guy. So for me personally, I think Stafford is one of my favorite GPP plays of the week.
Yeah, I love both passing offenses in this game. You have Stafford coming off a bye with, at home against Jacksonville. Bortles will turn the ball over and he'll get some short field opportunities. Man, we haven't talked about Marvin in a while. Like, this isn't really a good spot for him. He'll probably see Jalen Ramsey, who's been going against opposing top receivers. He's been pretty good for the most part. Um, I just want him to have a big game just so I can feel good about myself again. But yeah, I like Stafford a lot in tournaments because of what you said. Like, he won't be highly owned at all because people are going to go up and play Mariota for 100 more, who's been one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy over the last 6 or 7 weeks. And Stafford, we know Jacksonville is not like Seattle or Arizona in terms of passing defense, but they have that red number, and people don't like that, so they'll look away from him. So I like Stafford a lot at home. But yeah, Blake Bortles is 5,400 here. I know he's terrible, but he's in a great spot here. I mean, when I'm looking at matchups for fantasy, I love looking at correlation plays. And this is one of the best correlation plays of the slate. You have Blake Bortles, who, over the last 3 weeks, Jacksonville leads the NFL in pass attempts per game. We know they're trailing as much as any team in the league on most afternoons. And this is a great spot for that correlation play I was talking about. Jacksonville has an implied team total of around 21 points right now. So if you're telling me they score 3 touchdowns, I would say there's like an 85%, like a huge probability that all 3 of them come from Blake Bortles. 84.2% of the Jags' offensive touchdowns this season have come through the air, the second highest rate in the NFL behind the Detroit Lions. And then 83.3% of the Lions' touchdowns allowed on defense have come in the air. That's the highest rate in the league. So if Jacksonville is scoring points in this game, there's a massive chance that it's going to be from Blake Bortles and Allen Robinson and Julius Thomas in the passing game here. The Lions are coughing up 2.2 passing touchdowns per game, the third highest in the league. And opposing offenses are averaging the highest passer rating in the NFL by far. So I know Bortles is terrible, but he's 5,400. This is an offense or a defense we can exploit against the pass. Relatively high total. Yeah, it's gonna scare me a little bit, but I'm gonna have a lot of interest in Blake Bortles this week.
Yeah, I think so too. That price is just far too cheap, and I know he's horrible at real football. We talk about that all the time. But in DFS, that doesn't matter as much because look at the last 3 weeks. Like you said, they're throwing the ball a ton, and Bortles has actually more fantasy points than the Jaguars have actual points in pretty much every game this year. So it's one of those situations where if they score, it's going to be from Bortles. And I like those stats you brought up because that 85% chance that you mentioned isn't far-fetched considering the numbers that you talked about. So if that implied total is 3 touchdowns, if you give me an 85% chance that Blake Bortles is going to get those 3 touchdowns, I don't care if he throws 3 picks because he's just 5,400. Those 3 touchdowns will bring you 12 points. You know he's going to throw the ball over 40 times, so a chance for 300 yards is high. For me, that's well worth the risk you have of him just not playing very well again, because at some point the Lions are going to have to play prevent, and with prevent comes fantasy points. We've seen that from Bortles his whole career, so why would it stop this week? So 5,400, yeah. I'm with you. I'm way in.
And like, even if he throws a couple picks, that just helps his fantasy upside because he's going to be throwing. I think Detroit scores in this game plenty, so if he throws picks, he's going to have to throw more. Theo Riddick is also like quietly really safe. You look at his touches since week 2. So 15 touches in week 2. I know he missed a couple games, so we'll just look at his last games that he's played. 15, 17, 15, 17, 19, and 15 touches. The dude is a lock for at least that. We know Detroit's not like when they're not throwing to Marvin Jones, they're throwing 5-6 yards down the field. So they're not taking shots unless they're going to Marvin Jones. So Riddick is, I think, a safe cash game play every week. He has, I think he has tournament upside because he catches, he has these games where he can catch multiple touchdown passes. So yeah, I really think Riddick is a pretty safe guy to look at and on DraftKings, and obviously you want to play him on DraftKings and relative to FanDuel, but 5,100. He's cheaper than Derrick Henry, who barely plays. He's cheaper than I think everybody else. I'd rather play him than Doug Martin, who's a couple hundred more expensive. Might even prefer him over Jordan Howard because the Bears look like a mess right now. So yeah, Riddick's the guy we got to take serious every single week.
Yeah, I agree, especially in those PPR formats because, like you said, the guy gets a ton of targets, the guy gets a ton of catches, and considering he's the only running back they have that has the remote ability to run between the tackles right now. They're the only he's the only guy that's going to get those touches. So at some point, that volume has to say something for you for DFS value.
Yeah, but these last 2 games we talked about, I like them a lot. There's these first 3 games, honestly, on this slate, like they're all soaking with some massive fantasy value.
Absolutely. Now, what about this next game here? Because I don't know if we're going to be talking about this one as much. The problem is 2 of the worst defenses in terms of allowing fantasy points are in it. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Kansas City Chiefs. What I mean by allowing fantasy points, both these teams allow a ton of fantasy points to receivers. So Mike Evans is in play again, I think, as always. If we look at Jeremy Maclin coming back against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, maybe. But I'm going to go with my guy again. I loved him last week. I love him again this week if Maclin is out. Tyreek Hill. The guy is just a playmaker. He may only be 3'9", but he can get the job done.
Yeah, so like before last week, Andy Reid was talking about how it could be a multi-week absence for Maclin, and if that's the case, I think Tyreek Hill is absolutely in play. I know for sure, for instance, I have to play him in a couple seasonal formats where I have Julio and Tyrell Williams on a bye, but 13 targets last week against Carolina, caught 10 of them for 89 yards. He's also going to get maybe a carry or 2, and with that speed, he can take one to the house. So yeah, he's a legitimate option here. Like he's their big play guy. He has 4 catches of 20 or more yards since week 5. That's easily the highest on the Chiefs. So like 4,500 against a Tampa Bay secondary that has given up the most 20-yard and 40-yard passing plays outside of Oakland. That's a good spot for him. If Alex Smith takes shots on the field, it's going to be to him. And again, Tampa Bay, like we know this dude is explosive after the catch and down the field. Tampa Bay, bottom 3 in terms of, or top 3, depending on how you want to look at it, in terms of missed tackles per game. Around 8 per game, I believe, was the last time I checked. So this is a good spot for Tyreek Hill. I'm going to have some exposure to him for sure. What do you think about Mike Evans? Kind of underperformed last week, but he's going to see 12 or 13, 14 targets. He'll probably see Marcus Peters, but like I'm not afraid of Marcus Peters. Like he creates turnovers because he's really opportunistic. But like Mike Evans is a better receiver by far than Marcus Peters is a cornerback. So like I don't have a problem with Mike Evans. And if people are worried about Marcus Peters, I really would love to play him even more.
Yeah, exactly. And the way I look at Evans is last week he was 9,000 on DraftKings. This week he's 8,100. So you're getting a massive discount there. We know Antonio Brown's price jumped up with that successful game with Ben Roethlisberger back. So for me, I'm with you. I'm not afraid of Marcus Peters in terms of DFS. Now, if I was a quarterback in the NFL, I'm not sure how many times I would throw his way because he can take one to the other house. But the thing is, with Jameis Winston, he's going to be looking that way regardless of who's covering Mike Evans. The guy had 17, 11, and 13 targets in the 3 games prior to last week against the Bears. And I think that game was a situation where game flow just didn't necessarily need the Evans target to be so high because they were up 26 points. They won that game by 4 touchdowns. Evans was coming off a concussion, so they didn't want to necessarily get him too much work for no reason if they were up by that many points. So this is one of those games I think is going to be much closer. I actually think the Chiefs have a better chance to win this game than the Bears last week. And anytime the Bucs are losing, they're throwing. And anytime the Bucs are throwing, the ball's going to Mike Evans. So for me, he's one of my top receivers anywhere this week.
And he's quietly like, we know he has massive upside. He's not like Antonio Brown. He's not going to catch 11 balls most nights, but he's gone for 50 yards or more in I think 12 straight games right now. He's been 5 for 50 in every single game this season, obviously. So and there was a report actually. He only had 5 targets against the Bears. I saw a report on Twitter that the Bears actually doubled, like they made it a concerted effort to double Mike Evans all game, which is why you kind of saw Cameron Brate get a little bit more involved. So I don't know if the Chiefs are going to do that, but that was why Mike Evans didn't do, Mike Evans type things this week. He got doubled for the majority of the game. So, yeah, I think Mike Evans is a great spot here. And then a nugget I saw on Pro Football Focus for Tyreek Hill. So he has been targeted on 36% of his routes run this season. The highest rate of receivers of 100 routes run this season. So, if Macklin's out again, it's going to be him and it's going to be Kelsey in the passing game. And then I guess we got to talk about Spencer Ware too, who I like a good amount. He's given you a nice yardage floor. And the 7 games that he's played, most of the snaps, he's pretty much given you around 75 total yards from scrimmage. Tampa Bay has been – I remember in the first few weeks of the season, they were really good against the run, a team we wanted to target guys in the passing game against. But, they've been bad against the run in terms of fantasy points too. I think they're 7th in the NFL in terms of fantasy points allowed per game to running backs. Since week 5, they're allowing the 4th most rushing yards in the NFL. I think the Chiefs, a heavy home favorite here. It's a good spot for Where you like that in your running backs. They have a 25.5 implied team total. So Spencer Ware, I think, is in an awesome spot here as well. I don't think he's going to be too highly owned because, again, you have all these studs in great spots, and Spencer Ware is at $6K. I think Spencer Ware, one of my favorite running backs this week in terms of price.
Yeah, and he was 6,700 last week against Carolina, who we know is a good defense. This week he's just 6,000. So that price discount is definitely something to keep an eye on because you're getting a guy, as Adam said, that has a very high yardage floor. We know he catches passes. We know he's the lead guy in that offense in terms of touches. And especially since he was back 1 week after concussion, he got some snaps under his belt. I think they could let him loose a little bit more here against Tampa Bay, who, like you said, struggles to allow fantasy points to opposing running backs.
Yeah, I think now that I looked at his price and some of the underlying factors, I think I like him a lot, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this next game here is probably my favorite play of the whole week. And it sounds weird because a lot of people usually look for that obvious guy like a quarterback like Mariota or a running back like David Johnson against the Niners last week. But I love Odell Beckham this week. I'm going to try to use him in cash. I'm going to try to use him in tournaments. Against the Chicago Bears secondary, he has a chance to score not 1 but 2 touchdowns, maybe even 3. He's working a lot more out of the slot now, and we've seen his numbers increase in terms of targets as well. In the last 3 games, he's seen 11, 10, and 9, and before that, he saw 10 and 12. So since those early season numbers everybody was worried about, is he going to score? Is he regressing? Well, the guy's got 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games, so there you go.
That made
54 for 773 and 6 touchdowns. The guy's only 8,500. He's $100 cheaper, $1,000 cheaper than Antonio Brown. Odell is my guy in cash games this week. There's no doubt about that. If I'm spending up right now, I know things can change, but I don't think this one's going to. He's going to be the top receiver I pay for this week.
Yeah, and maybe you worry about the Bears kind of the second straight week going against an elite wide receiver. Do they double Odell Beckham? But Mike Evans is playing the slot, so I don't know how they're going to be able to double Beckham in the slot. Yeah, he's one of my favorite receivers of the roster for sure, and I think his ownership is going to be pretty low considering it's Odell Beckham because everybody's. I mean, depending on the price, Antonio Brown is 9,500, but he's in a great spot. Evans is there. Yeah, I always love Odell Beckham, so I'm not going to fight you. He hasn't seen fewer than 8 targets in any game this season, so the volume's there. I was laughing at the people worrying about Odell Beckham the first couple weeks of the season. He's unbelievable. He's one of the best players in the NFL. So,
yeah, it's one thing about that is a lot of people will be looking between him and Antonio Brown for cash. But the way I look at this is, Antonio Brown's been excellent in the past couple of weeks, but the Steelers have been trailing a lot. He had 18 targets, 14 catches last week. They're not going to be trailing to the Browns. I just don't see it. I know they haven't had a great season so far, but the Browns are 0-10. The Steelers have a chance to be up by 20 or 30 points at halftime, and when that happens, they're just going to pound the rock again because there's really no reason at this point to try to risk any more injuries to that team because they have to win to be able to get in the playoffs. So
what do we do?
Yeah,
what do we do with the Bears receiving corps now that Alshon's suspended for 4 weeks? This is kind of a good spot for Eddie Royal, depending on where he lines up, because we know the middle of the field is where you want to target the Giants with their linebackers, and the smaller receivers have kind of had a lot of success against them out of the slot. I believe they're bottom 5 in terms of fantasy points per game allowed from the slot. We've seen Tavon Austin have a good game against them. We've seen Willie Snead in the slot light them up. We've seen I'll have to go back and look, but there's been 4 or 5 instances where slot guys have had, 60 yards or a touchdown against this team. We know the targets are going to have a nice uptick because Alshon was seeing around 9 targets each of the last 4 or 5 games, and now he's out. So you have Eddie Royal, you have Cameron Meredith, you have Zach Miller. Eddie Royal is 3,400. I think I'm going to have, if you're playing cash games and you want a cheap guy to let you fit in these studs, I think Eddie Royal's got to be high on that list.
Yeah, absolutely. 3,400 is the cheapest he's been since week 1, and this will probably be the most volume he's seen all season. So you put those two things together, and you have one of these plays that just make a lot of sense. Now, add in the matchup that you talked about against the Giants, you know they can cover the outside, and that will be Meredith, and that will be, I guess, who's the other guy that came back this week? He's going to be playing the outside.
It's not going to be Kevin White.
I think Wilson. Is Wilson back this week?
Marquise Wilson's been returning to practice. They're saying they're trying to get him back, but I'll have to check what his status is. Thing is, he kind of played both. So he a couple years ago, he played outside and inside. Right now, you're going to have, if he doesn't play, you're going to have Deontay Thompson and Josh Bellamy. So that's rough. Like, I wonder if the Giants even just cover those guys. Like, if they just put like DRC on Meredith and then like Apple or Janoris on Royal. Like, I'm not afraid of Josh Bellamy or Deontay Thompson. Deontay Thompson's more of a special teamer.
Yeah, he was a special teamer in college, so especially in the NFL. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think Royal would be the only guy here that's worth targeting because of that price. The only issue is using a guy like that in cash games sometimes can scare you. But you got to remember all the factors going in his way. So with this 3,400, you can do a lot worse, that's for sure.
Yeah. So you really love Eli or Odell? Does that mean you like Eli again?
Yeah, I do. I think that this is one of those things.
Are the Giants at home here? Yeah, they are. So Eli is so much better at home.
Yeah. We talked about 2 weeks ago why I liked Odell and Eli together against the Eagles, and it's the same situation now. The problem is, though, Eli is 6,300 this week. Against the Eagles, he was only 5,700. He was 5,900 last week. This is the highest price for Eli since week 3. And going into the year, remember, a lot of people thought this was going to be one of those years for him where he has north of 30, 35 touchdowns. So you got to remember that when you look at price. 6,300 for him is not what I would like to pay, but I still like him as a player. I'm not just or as a play this week. I just don't know if I could use him together because, like you said earlier, Mariota is only $400 more. Matt Stafford is only $300 more. I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense. I might just play Beckham by himself.
Yeah, Eli's always a good tournament play, or at least an interesting tournament play, because he's either going to go for 200 on the dot and 1 with 2 picks, or he's going to go for 350 and 3 or 4. Like that's what he does. He rarely has. If you look at his game log, he doesn't really have a middle ground. So that makes him like always a really interesting tournament play. It doesn't make him always a great tournament play, but in decent spots, and this is a decent spot, he's always an interesting tournament play for sure.
Yeah, just to touch on those home road numbers, I have that up here right now. Check this out. In 5 home games this year, Eli Manning has 1,618 yards, 1,618 yards, and 11 touchdowns. He's thrown 8 picks too, but in terms of fantasy points, he's averaging 22 a game. On the road, in 4 games, he has 863 yards and 4 touchdowns, 12 fantasy points a game. That's a huge difference. Now, I know it's not a massive sample, but you're not going to get big samples in the NFL. They only play 16 games. That's something definitely to look at without a doubt. Like you said, Eli is much better at home. So if you did want to play him, this would be the spot to do so. I'm just not sure I can play him over those other guys at that price.
Yeah, I'm with you. I prefer all those other guys you talked about.
This next game here is a game that I just kind of want to throw off the face of the earth, let alone the slate. Arizona at Minnesota. It could be 3-2. It could be 1-0. First 1-0 game ever in the history of the NFL. It could be 4-2 with 2 safeties. The only person I would consider using, I think, would be David Johnson, but I don't know if I want to pay that for a guy like that against Minnesota because you know they're going to try to key on him. Just one of these games where I think the over-under could be set at 15, and it wouldn't be a stretch. So I don't think there's going to be many points scored in this game at all.
Yeah, I don't want to play Palmer. He's been terrible. I don't want to play any of the outside receivers on Arizona. Maybe Fitzgerald, but even that, like this barely is a 40-point total. I mean, David Johnson has 100 scrimmage yards in 13 consecutive starts. So he's always in play, especially now that he's dropped to under 8K. I don't think people will be like relatively be on him. But yeah, I'm not I'm not playing anybody on Minnesota's offense. There was a report that came out that Bruce Arians said Pat Peterson's gonna follow Stephon Diggs around. So he's had insane amount of receptions the last 2 weeks. His price has gone up to 7K on DraftKings. You look at geez, over his
42
last
targets last 3 games.
yeah, and he's caught what 34 of them.
Yep.
That's ridiculous.
It makes me sad that Peterson's following him because he would have been a great play this week in cash.
Yeah, I talked about it 2 weeks ago against the Redskins. Like Bradford threw the ball 39 times, and like 30 of them were 5 yards or 5 or 6 yards down the field, or less than 10 yards, I should say. I don't know what the number was from last week, but it was the same game plan. It was the same exact thing with their offensive line and whatnot. So, yeah, I don't know if I can play him at 7K against Pat Pete now that we know that he's going to be following him. Peterson, like legitimately one of the best corners in the NFL. He's not like a fraud guy who we kind of like. He's not like a Darius Slay where we kind of worry about him, but he's still gets burnt by elite guys. Like Pat Pete doesn't really get burnt by elite guys, let alone good guys like Diggs. Like Diggs is a good player. He's not an elite player. So yeah, I don't really have anybody that's glaring in this game. There's been a lot of pressure. If you're looking for sacks, maybe Minnesota's defense has really been struggling the last 2 weeks, but they're back at home. Palmer's been pressured a lot. Arizona's a lot better run blocking unit than pass blocking, and they just lost Jared Veldier, I believe. So if you're looking for maybe sacks, maybe Minnesota's defense at home, but yeah, not a lot of interest in this game for me.
Yeah, the only one would have been Diggs, but like you said earlier, with Patrick Peterson shadowing him, it's just not worth paying for him, considering the fact that his price jumped so much. But I did want to mention the other defense here, Adam. I think the Arizona Cardinals defense could sack Sam Bradford at least 6 times if Bradford's going to be throwing the ball.
How many? Can you? I'm looking up something right now for the next game. Could you see how many sacks Washington had last week? Because I know I was into Washington's defense. They were decent, but I don't know how many sacks they had.
Yeah, the Redskins last week had I know had a ton of pressures. They only got 3 sacks, but I know they got to Bradford a ton, and they forced.
Yeah, I mean three's not bad.
Yeah, it was one of those situations where they literally could have had 6, 7, 8. It just Bradford got that ball out just a second before they could finish them to the ground. So.
Yeah, and like that could be similar this week. The last 2 or 3 years, nobody's blitzed more than the Cardinals. They blitz highest rate in the NFL by a pretty large margin, if I remember correctly. So, it's just going to depend. We know Bradford's not going to take shots down the field, especially with the Cardinals blitzing as much as they do. So, if Diggs is being shadowed by Pat Pete and he can't get open, and they're blitzing, who's going to get open? There might be some sack opportunity, like you said, for these guys in Arizona here. So I like that call a lot. The worst offensive line in the league that cannot pass block, cannot run block against the team that blitzes more than anybody in the league, and they're a fast defense with Deion Buchanan there at linebacker and those guys. So,
yeah, it's interesting too. If you're looking on DraftKings, the Cardinals are priced below their defense, below the Lions, Vikings, Chiefs, Giants, Patriots, Steelers, and Seahawks. They're only 3,100. So that's definitely my cash defense for now. I can kind of plug that in.
Yeah, I like that too, and especially because like the floors against most Minnesota defenses this season, or against most defenses against Minnesota's offense this season, are pretty high. Like they're not going to score a lot of points. They're averaging, what are they at right now? 19.4 points per game. It's 26 in the league. Points per play, they're at 25th, so they're not going to put up a lot of points, and there's some sack upside there. And Bradford's not like a Tyrod or a Brady or someone. I'm not putting Tyrod in Brady's category. Calm down. I'm just saying, it's like those guys don't turn the ball over a lot. So when you play defense, you want turnovers and sacks, but Bradford will turn the ball over and he will take sacks. So.
Yeah, without a question.
Don't blow up my mentions. I wasn't I'm over, but I'm not stupid.
Now, the next game has Tyrod in it, so I think it's a good time for us to talk about him. Adam, his price came up finally, but only $600. He's $5,600. It's still too cheap. I know the Bengals have a decent defense, but I mean, the guy put up 27 against Seattle. He put up 18 against New England, 24 and 20 in the previous 2 games before that. He has at least 15 DraftKings points in every single game except for week 1. That was against Baltimore, where he didn't throw or rush for a touchdown. So that was a bit of an anomaly given how that Bills offense works now. So for me, Tyrod's in play again. I mean, we got to talk about him again.
Yeah, real quick before we get to the GOAT. So I'm looking at PFF right now. Sam Bradford's average depth of target last week was 5.3 yards, the lowest of the season for him. 8 of his passes went for 10 or more yards. It's just, you're not going to give up big plays against this offense, and you're going to get sacks. On to the GOAT. Yeah, like you said, at least 15 fantasy points in every game except for week 1. And Cincinnati's been bad against the pass. Like they've been giving you a relatively high floor. 8 of the 9 quarterbacks that face them have scored 15 fantasy points or more. Tyrod's scored on the ground in 3 straight games. I mean, you watched him against the game that the Bills won against Seattle. Yeah, I said it. He was awesome. Like he played incredible with no help other than really Robert Woods. McCoy is looking healthy, and that'll help this offense even more. And like he's just at 5,600. He's giving you. Not only is he giving you at least 15, but he's giving you close to 18, 19 every single game. And that allows you in cash, just like he's a lock for cash. He's never going to kill you. Doesn't turn the ball over a lot. The reason he threw a pick on Monday night against Seattle is because it was a route run miscommunication with, I think it was Marquise Goodwin. So you don't even got to ask me. Like I'm going to be playing him in cash every single week. He's going to be in my cash game article because he's on the slate and he is always the cash game lock. So, yeah, until his price goes up to where it should be, I mean, I'm going to play him.
Yeah, it's weird because I was looking at his price history. Week 1, he was 6,900. And then week 2, he was 6,300, understandably, after a 5-point game. But in week 2, he had 25. Since then, 58, 54, 52, 53, 55, 52 in mid-price. So it's like something happened there with the way the pricing works. Maybe it's the volume on passing attempts in their algorithm. Maybe it's the way that the things are calculated based on passing yards or something.
Like that hasn't mattered. Like he's getting to 18, 19 points with less than 30 passing attempts. I don't get it. Like it literally hasn't mattered for all but 1 week this season, and we're in week 11. Yeah,
it's one of those things where you're going to have to decide between using him or Mariota this week. That's the
I might just play on aces and play both, just so I can have a lineup where I play both of the GOATs.
Yeah, I think it might be one of those situations where I just split cash lineups where you use both and maybe upgrade a receiver in one and downgrade in the other, because I don't think you can go wrong with either one of them.
No, Mariota obviously has higher upside, but both are going to be like in my article for sure, and I'll probably write. My cash game article is usually a good couple thousand words, and I might be like 6,000 just so I can have 1,000 apiece for both of them.
You have 4,000 on Tyrod and 2,000 on the other positions of the entire season. Now, using anybody else in this game, maybe AJ Green or Eifert. I like Eifert again because his price still isn't as high as it should be. We've seen now he's played 2 games in his full role, and he has 12 catches and 17 targets for 198 yards and a touchdown. So that's the way I'm looking at it. I like him a little bit against the Bills, but I'm not quite sure I want to target that many people on the Bengals offense with the other situations at similar prices.
Yeah, so it's literally like an average matchup. Buffalo ranked 15th against tight ends this season, and the usage has been there for Eifert. The problem with me is that Buffalo's linebackers are extremely fast and athletic. Zach Brown has been awesome. Now Eifert's a great player, and he could have a good game, so I don't mind him in tournaments. AJ Green I always love because the market share is just massive. And Buffalo, it's paining me to say this, but like remember last year and 2 years ago, I thought Ronald Darby and Stephon Gilmore were one of the best cornerback duos in the NFL. And they've really struggled this season. They're really inconsistent. They'll have games where they'll play great, they'll play physical, and then they'll have games where they give up a lot of blown coverage. I know the Chris Hogan touchdown a few weeks ago, like the 60-yard touchdown was a blown coverage by Stephon Gilmore. They give up a lot of defensive passing interferences where they kind of get beat and have to hold a guy to prevent a long play or a touchdown. But yeah, AJ Green, I've always loved AJ Green. He's seeing 32% of the market share of targets this season. It's one of the highest numbers in the NFL. He's on pace for a career high in yardage. And Buffalo, they're not a top 10 unit in terms of fantasy points allowed per game to receivers, but they give up a lot of yardage. So yeah, I love AJ Green in tournaments. Buffalo's at 183.2 yards per game to opposing wide receivers in terms of the entire receiving corps. That's a relatively high number in the NFL. So, yeah, I like AJ Green.
Let's move on to the next game here. We got a lot of games to cover here. About halfway through, Baltimore at Dallas. Now, this is something that's going to be very tough for me because I'm not playing anybody for the Ravens. I can throw that out the window. But I want to play Zeke. The problem is this is literally one of the toughest matchups for any player or any position against any defense is running backs against the Ravens. So, Adam, are you doing it? Are you going to play Zeke this week against Baltimore?
So in tournaments, I'll always play Zeke because he's never highly owned. Last week he wasn't highly owned, especially this week because he's 8K in a quote-unquote bad matchup. But this offensive line, you saw what they can do on that last game-winning touchdown.
The Red Sea.
That image was unbelievable what they did to the Steelers' defensive line. So, like, he's matchup proof every single week when you're getting the usage he's getting, when you're playing as well as he's playing. 44% of his yardage this season. He already has 1,005 rushing yards. 44% of it have come before contact. 44% have come before he's even touched. So, like, that just tells me that this offensive line is making Zeke matchup proof. Plus, like, the offensive line, you can say, oh, it's the offensive line, but this dude is straight up disgusting at football. Like, he's nasty. He leads the NFL in yards after contact as well. Like, he's good. So in tournaments he's never going to be highly owned, I feel like, because, and I don't know why. Like, he hasn't had less than 4.6 yards per carry since week 2. He's getting 25 touches a game. And Dallas is, Dallas is going to run the football at a high rate, pretty much at a higher rate than anybody in the NFL. Right now they're running the ball 50.6% of the time. The next highest is Tennessee at 47.3%. So in tournaments, yeah, I'm going to play Zeke for sure. I'm not too scared of the Baltimore matchup. I know they've been good against the run and good in terms of fantasy points, but we were quote unquote worried about the matchup against Green Bay, and he crushed in that game because the Dallas offensive line is incredible, the offense is incredible, and Zeke's pretty much incredible.
Yeah, you mentioned that offense. Just looking at what they've done, Freddie, this is recently. They scored 35, 35, 29, 30, 28, 24, 31, 27. The only time they scored under that amount of points was week 1 where they actually lost. So since week 1, they've scored 24 or more points in every single game. Dak's always cheap. Dez has been relatively cheap since he's coming back to form in terms of statistics. And honestly, Ezekiel Elliott was far too cheap until these last 3 weeks where he's around 8,000. So I'm with you. I think I'll have a share of Ezekiel Elliott. But I think I'm going to use him in cash instead of tournaments because, to me, if anything's limited his price, it would be his upside. Now, it sounds weird to say that considering he leads the NFL in basically every category for running backs. But the way I'm looking at it is I think if they do stop him, he'll still end up with 100 yards, maybe a touchdown. And for me, that's enough for a floor. Just I don't know if I can see him getting 200 yards and 2 touchdowns like last week where he went for over 203 total. So for me, I think it's a cash play only, but I still don't love the matchup, so I'm a bit weary.
Yeah. Also, Roto just tweeted out Macklin didn't practice today, so looking good for Tyreek Hill. But yeah, who else? I don't know if I really like anybody else in this game. Maybe Dallas's defense, just because it's really hard to play Dallas's defense unless you're playing cash because they don't generate pressure, and their offense is on the field so much. So like that gives them a relatively safe floor, but they're not going to get 5 sacks and 3 picks and a return touchdown. But like Baltimore's offense, they looked bad in the first half against Cleveland, and then of course it was Cleveland, so they got it going. But I'm fine with Dallas's defense as a cash game play for just if you're looking for 7-8 points maybe.
Yeah, let's move on to this next game here. I think that this is going to be obviously the chalk at all 3 positions. We're talking about Pittsburgh at the Cleveland Browns. Big Ben, chalk. Le'Veon Bell, chalk. Antonio Brown. It's one of those situations where you look at everybody against the Browns pretty much every week. They're going to be the highest owned stack. They're going to be the highest owned player at each position, I imagine, unless there's an injury that comes out where there's a cheap running back. We don't really have to talk about it too much. Big Ben's in play. Le'Veon Bell's in play. Antonio Brown's in play. But I think somebody we do have to talk about is the number 2 receiver for that offense right now. not Sammy Coates. It's not Marcus Wheaton, who's been hurt, not Hayward Bay. It's Eli Rogers, who I'm looking at it in the last 4 weeks, he has at least 5 targets in every game. So if you want to be a little bit contrarian for a team that's going to be highly owned, consider another Eli Rogers stack because last week it paid off. He had over 14 points.
Yeah, and I haven't really looked, but if he plays in the slot for them, it's an even better matchup because the Browns have been torched against slot receivers this season. So yeah, I don't hate him, but yeah, it's as simple as that. I mean, you play the big three from Pittsburgh if you can afford them, if you want to pay up for them. And then if you're looking for somebody on the Cleveland side, maybe Corey Coleman and Pryor because they should be chasing points. And that's really what you do with this game. Maybe Pittsburgh's defense as well.
Yeah, I do like Pryor as well, but the efficiency scares me with this offense now. You know it's not all Pryor's fault, but the guy has 91 targets, and he only has 600 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's not very efficient at all, but you know the volume's going to be there. So if he gets half of his targets, you're looking at over 4 catches. He's only 5,600, and the Browns will be throwing the ball because, honestly, they won't have a choice trying to keep up with Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
All right, now the one question I have about this game is tight end. Do you want to use a Jesse James, or is it just not worth using because of all the other guys that have to come before him?
Cleveland's been torched against tight ends for most of the season, but I don't really want to play Jesse James, especially because Ladarius Green's starting to get a little bit more involved. He made his debut last week, so I probably won't play Jesse James.
And he was so close to that 2-point conversion to fade the end zone too, Ladarius Green. So
yeah.
He looked good. I mean, limited snaps, but like you said, Jesse James is a low-volume guy anyway. Now with Green back, it's not worth playing.
Yeah.
All right, next game here, Jared Goff's debut at home. Miami Dolphins travel to L.A. to take on the Rams. This is not a game that piqued my interest basically at all. I mean, I was looking at maybe using Ajayi in tournaments again, but the one thing about him is his price has come up a ton, so it's not like he has upside of 6 or 7 times his value like we saw earlier in the season. So when you look at Ajayi, 6,800, LA has a good defensive line in terms of talent. Sometimes they've gotten burned a little bit because those guys are looking for sacks. But the only person in this game I think that's worth targeting for me would be Jay Ajayi.
This is like a completely random take, but I think the Rams defense could be really good this week. Like, I think the crowd's going to be fired up because their number 1 picks making their debut, whatever. I don't think Goff's going to do well at all, but like, I could see the Rams defense getting going here. But yeah, other than that, like, not playing. You know, some people might play Miami's defense, whatever. I don't hate it, but I don't like Ajayi in the spot. I'm not playing Todd Gurley. And Miami, we talk about Dallas and one of these teams that limit possessions for the opposing offenses. But right now, I mean, Miami's up there too. Over the last 4 weeks, I think they lead the league or in terms of opposing offenses are averaging the fewest plays per game against Miami over the last 4 weeks, coincided with Jay Ajayi's breakouts. So obviously you weren't really targeting anybody on the Rams offense anyway. But yeah, like they play slow. So yeah, this game's going to be gross, I think. Like similar to the Jets game last week, it could be like a 13-10 game. It might be a little bit more high scoring than last week, so maybe it's like 13-10.
Yeah, every time I look at the Rams each week, you see Gurley's price just plummeting, but just you can't do it. I mean, the offensive line's been dreadful. You know they're going to give the ball to him. Kean Fahey on Twitter did a breakdown of all 21 of his carries last week, and I watched the first 15. There was literally one good job by the offensive line, one, and the guy got 14 yards on it.
And Miami's D-line is starting to play better with Wakens.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yo, who would have thought, if I would have told you that in Week 11, Todd Gurley would be $5,000 on DraftKings, you'd have thought I was insane. Like, yeah. Like he's literally
didn't end up being well because of that line.
If you would have told me that Jacquizz Rodgers would be $200 more expensive in Week 11 than Todd Gurley, man.
Well, how about this one? Christian Michael's more expensive. He got cut, so there you go.
Dude, his career's been wild. What a crazy career for him.
That's I think we should just talk about that right away because that's one of the next games up. It's Philadelphia at Seattle. And originally, I was going to look at Michael as a decent play a couple weeks ago, but he's cut. He's gone. It's going to be Rawls and Procise, who was unbelievable at Notre Dame at a bunch of different positions. And if you watched that game the other night, this guy's for real. I mean, you can't take him lightly. He's going to be the guy if Rawls can't go for a complete workload, although he is expected to come back this week.
Yeah, but like they lined, I'm pretty sure, didn't they line Process up at receiver a couple times?
Times, yeah.
So like 4,200 on DraftKings, his stock is rising. I think you can play him against the Eagles. We saw these linebackers at coverage against a similar player in Theo Riddick. So I don't mind Process. What do you think about Russ at home? Russ looks to be Russ again. 6,100. I think that's really cheap for him. His ownership can be really low. I think he's interesting in tournaments.
Yeah, his mobility looks like it's starting to come back last week. He was running around a little bit through 3 touchdowns. 6,100, I have to consider that because Doug Baldwin's going to get his chances in the red zone against this Eagles secondary who –
The only problem is for this matchup, like there's nobody with an elite matchup in his offense, right? So the Eagles have been awesome against tight ends. I know Jimmy Graham can get it against anybody. And then, Baldwin in the slot, so he's not going to really see McKelvin or anybody, but still, Russ has been Russ again. And that we see this with Seattle every year. They start off mediocre in the first 5, 6, 7 weeks, and then they get hot. And we know Doug Baldwin's ridiculous second half streak last year, and he started off 3 touchdowns last week. So maybe this is the situation where these guys are just hot and they're underpriced right now, and you want to play them. I like him in tournaments a lot.
Do you have any remote interest in the Eagles at all?
I might go back to the Sproulswell on DraftKings because I don't think the Eagles are going to be able to run the ball in this game.
Not at all, yeah.
And that's the thing with Seattle. They can't run the ball. Even 3-4 weeks back when it was just Christine Michael, they can't run the ball. You saw them abandon the run against Buffalo a couple weeks back. They did not run the ball. So if they can't run the ball, it's going to be Process again. And it's not like they're Pittsburgh where they have Brown, Bell, and then whoever else. They Doug Baldwin's their best receiver, but he isn't warrant 15 targets a game. Graham doesn't warrant 12 targets a game. It's kind of and the only I saw people talking about this last week. Russell Wilson doesn't check down his running back a lot, but Process has been so good that he's going to be more of a focal point of their offense. So we could see that kind of change, which in return could make Wilson's job easier against good defenses like the Eagles.
Yeah, very true. I think that'll be an interesting game to take a deeper look at. We'll talk about it on Friday as well with RC Live. Now, the other game there before in that division is the New England Patriots at the San Francisco 49ers. And
Blunt.
Running backs against the Niners have been ridiculous.
Blunt.
The way the game flow works has been ridiculous for Tom Brady and this offense. LeGarrette Blount this week, Adam. I hate to say play a Patriots running back with Brady back in cash, but he has got to be safe this week. He has to.
Hasn't mattered with Brady back, dude. The only game this season that he hasn't scored a touchdown was the game that Jacoby Brissett started. It's the only game. New England's 29.8 rushing attempts per game is third in the NFL. Teams against San Francisco this season have been just seen huge rushing volume. 35.2 rushing attempts per game against the Niners this year, easily the highest in the league. We know Blount has massive upside and is a lot safer in games where New England's heavily favored. They're heavily favored in this game. They allow the most rushing yards in the NFL. They allow the most rushing touchdowns per game. Blount is seeing, I think he's second in the NFL in red zone carries behind, of course, Melvin Gordon. Yeah, dude, he's got to be looked at as one of the safest plays of the entire slate, for sure. I don't even think it's close. So, what is he, 6,400? I mean, David Johnson didn't go for 100 yards, but he scored twice because that's what he does. And Blount right now, you got to think, has the highest touchdown equity in the NFL among running backs. And I believe on the RotoCurve premium stats, he has the highest touch rate of all running backs.
Yeah, that's correct. He does. And with the way that this game looks like it's going to go, he's going to get the carries in the red zone anyway, but he's going to be getting carries between the 20s a lot too when the Patriots have a very high chance to be up by more than 3 scores. The issue with Blount has been in the past 2 weeks, a lot of people are going to look at, he hasn't been efficient. Longest 2 runs were 13 and 7 yards. Well, He's played Seattle and Buffalo. He still has 39 carries and over 35 fantasy points. So
yeah. What's his touch rate? Like 57% or something like that?
57%, yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
Dude,
The 6,400 price bump is a ton. That's 1,500 up from last week, but that's what you're getting when you're going from Seattle to San Francisco against the run.
Yeah, he's like every game that Brady's been under center, he's scored. And the Niners just can't get off the field. 12.3 possessions per game the opposing offenses are averaging against San Francisco, the most in the league. Blunt's got 25 for 95 to 103 in his realm of possibility this week, 100%. He's going to be highly owned, but you can make the case he's arguably the best play on the board, price included. Just a lock for me this week. And I guess we got to talk about the passing game with Gronk looking like he's going to be out. I saw on the Twitter sphere that this is a homecoming game for one Julian Edelman.
That guy, I'm telling you, something about him this year has just been – first of all, it looks like he has just butter lathered all over his arms. He can't hold on to the ball. He hasn't had 100 yards in a game yet all season, very close to last week with 99. He's only scored one touchdown, but his price still remains in the low 6,000s, and sometimes he approaches the high 6,000s. I can't use him yet because he's not seeing those 13, 14, 15 targets anymore with all the other options there. And this week especially, I don't think they're going to be passing much in the second half because they're not going to have to. I mean, they might get Deion Lewis some work as he works his way back, but I think this is one of those games where even if Brady has a bunch of touchdowns in the first half, the second half won't be worth it. So if I'm playing Brady, it's just going to be him by himself without any receivers.
Yeah, and you know that I'm a broken record when I talk about big-bodied wide receiver ones against the Niners. We know that New England doesn't have that, that X wide receiver on the outside, but that guy is going to be Gronk / Martellus Bennett in this spot. So if Gronk's out, I think Martellus Bennett is right there with Delaney Walker and Jordan Reed for me this week. We know that New England targets their tight ends a lot. I think Bennett will rip this team up if Gronk sits. So, yeah, I would guess Gronk misses just this week. They said it's probably only going to be like a 1 or 2 week at most absence. But if he sits, man, Bennett is gonna tear them up, I think.
I agree. And honestly, when you look at it from the Patriots' perspective, what's the point of Gronk playing this week? I mean, if you can't beat the Niners without Gronk, I mean, come on, right?
Yeah, I'd be shocked if he played.
Yeah, I would too. Now, you mentioned Jordan Reed. He's in this next game, Sunday Night Football, and it's actually going to be a good one. The Green Bay Packers travel to Washington to face the Washington Redskins, and Green Bay's defense has no interest in playing football right now, so I kind of want to consider a stack of Cousins to Reed because Cousins is just 5,800 this week. Jordan Reed's just 5,900. So for a combined price of 12,700 on DraftKings, you're looking at a connection that could yield you 50 points, and for that reason, I'm in.
Yeah, so 73% of the touchdowns allowed by the Packers have come via the pass. That puts them 27th in the NFL. So relatively high up there. They're bottom 5. And Kirk Cousins is right there in terms of red zone passing attempts. He's right there with Rivers and Breeze and Ryan and Brady and those guys. So Cousins has some nice touchdown upside here in what should be a high-scoring game. What do you think about this guy who I just saw on Twitter return to practice again today on Wednesday? It looks like he's going to play. Deshaun Jackson. We know the Packers secondary is bad. They give up a lot of big plays. They gave up multiple big plays to Tajay Sharp, Delaney Walker, and Rashard Matthews last week. Deshaun Jackson could be super interesting in tournaments. What's his price right now?
Just 4,800 on DraftKings. So
yeah, like it's a little risky because he may not be 100%, and we know Jordan Reed and Crowder are involved in that offense. But do we think Rob Kelly gets stuff going here? Probably not. I know the Packers have been worse against the run lately, but they've been getting lit up by elite backs like Zeke and DeMarco Murray. Rob Kelly's not an elite back, so I kind of might have some interest in Deshaun Jackson if he keeps continuing to practice. He practiced today. If he practices Thursday and Friday, he's a lock to play, and I think he could be interesting in tournaments.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm considering him yet, but like you said, if he practices again, he is that big play threat despite having a low yard per catch this season. At some point, he's going to break one loose, and if he's healthy, could happen at any moment. I'm looking on the other side, though. A lot of people will talk about Rodgers, and he's worth using again this week because he's going to have to throw a million times for the Packers to have a chance anyway. I think Devontae Adams is strongly considering one of these guys every single week. You can just kind of plug in your cash game lineup. I mean, last week he had 9 targets, caught 6 of them for 156. Didn't have a touchdown, but he had 6 already this year. At least 8 targets in 4 straight games. In these games combined, he has 30 plus 17, so you have 47 targets in 4 games. He's caught over 32 of the passes in those games. So I'm just looking at him as a cash game player. The only issue is he's all the way up to 6,700, which is very expensive for a receiver on DraftKings.
Yeah, and we would think that Josh Norman would be on Jordy Nelson on that right side. So yeah, I mean, you gotta consider this dude. He's seeing massive and they love looking at him in the red zone. It's Jordy and him right now in the red zone for the Packers. So and Rodgers leads the league in pass attempts from inside the 10-yard line. So yeah, I think Devontae Adams, he's tied for the league in targets over the last 4 weeks. So like he's no fluke right now. And it's not just because he's seeing the volume he's producing. Like he's looked a lot better than last year when people were obviously making fun of him. He's looked good. So yeah, I'm interested in him. Jordan Reed, I love. Julius Thomas, Ebron, Delaney have torched them the last couple games. So there's a lot to like in this game. I mean, Washington with an implied total of 26, Green Bay with 24. Lots to like in this game for sure.
We have one game left, Adam, and it's actually a game not in this country. And it's not in London either, which seemed to be a bit of a trend this year. The Houston Texans traveled to, not Oakland, but Mexico City, I believe it is, to face the Oakland Raiders on Monday Night Football. This game is not going to be in a lot of slates. A lot of people won't be considering it on any site because of the fact that it's not considered in the bigger slates on the bigger sites. But there is a lot to like in this game, I think, because Derek Carr is only 6,400. Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree are 7,500 and 6,500. So maybe if you're playing the Monday to Thursday slate, it's not a great matchup for this passing game for the Raiders. But coming off a bye, they have the ability to put up big numbers. So I'm looking at that. And I'm actually looking at, if you're playing that small slate, I'm going with the Raiders defense. I'm picking every defense against Osweiler all season and for the rest of the season. So for me, that's what I'm looking at in this game.
Yeah, I like Oakland's defense. I picked them up and started them in seasonal this week. I like Latavius Murray too. Since coming off injury, we've finally seen them commit to one back. He's got 20, 16, and 21 touches the last 3 weeks. And in games where they can kind of control the pace, he's getting more usage. The Raiders have the best run blocking unit in the NFL according to Pro Football Focus. The Texans are bottom 7 in rushing yards allowed per game. I think this is a game where Oakland can kind of control the game here, like I talked about, and should be a good volume for Murray. He's looked good the last couple weeks, especially against Denver, where he looked outstanding. So I like Latavius Murray. Not really interested in the passing game too much for either side. So it's really for me. It's kind of I want to play Hopkins, man. This is a good matchup for him, but the last couple weeks, he's seen over 10 targets a game with Will Fuller out. So if Will Fuller's out again, maybe Hopkins. But Osweiler, the dude threw 27 times last week and had 99 passing yards.
That's awful. I mean, that's really, really bad. Really bad.
That's next level bad.
Yeah, that's probably one of the worst lines I think I've seen in a long time for quarterbacks, other than Osweiler against the Vikings.
Minnesota earlier in the year. That was one of the worst quarterback games I've ever seen in my life.
The 2 worst lines I think I've ever seen.
All 12 years of my life, I've never seen worse.
Yeah. the same guy, literally. I have the numbers up right here. Brock Osweiler threw 27 passes, he had 99 yards. But earlier this year against the Minnesota Vikings, he had 19 for 22 for 184. But if you watch that game, he had about 63 yards into the fourth quarter on about 29 attempts. So
I remember he threw like a 7-yard out to DeAndre Hopkins the sideline. The ball bounced three yards in front of him, and he caught it off the bounce. It was just like, the hell was that? It's so bad, man.
Yeah, I mean, they got worse at quarterback this year. There's no doubt.
Yeah, yo, I miss Brian Hoyer.
I mean, it's real. I can't believe anybody could say that and agree, but I agree with you 100%. All right, that wraps up all the games. We had a lot of thoughts this week. There are just a few teams on bye, so everybody's going to be playing. It's week 11, so there's just 2 weeks left of byes. Not many teams left to consider. So we're going to be having a lot of full slates for the rest of the season, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Now, week ahead, we have at RotoCurve, there is a plethora of content coming out. We have ownership information coming Thursday night, which we will be talking about on RC Live on Friday, so please be sure to tune in there. A bunch of tools. We have cheat sheets for every position, including a full cheat sheet listed with every player, a lineup builder you can use to make your own lineups based on our tools as well. We have red zone stats, snaps, targets, everything you can think of to make your lineups a little bit better in terms of research and information for NFL DFS. We also have a DFS pro on hand at Brian Healy, who does a cheat sheet each and every week. The guy just won live finals 2 weeks ago. He finished 6th in a live final this weekend. In the live fire qualifier, he almost qualified, but he had 2 guys underperform. So the guy's been on fire. Please be sure to get your cheat sheet there. We also know Adam will have 3 articles this week, a bargains article coming today, and of course his monster cash article, which always comes on Thursdays. And then he has his picks based on some fades and some pivots a little bit. I guess I want to say some GPP plays on Friday, so be sure to be ready for that. Also, Jim McCormick will have his roster's best buys piece, which is one of the best pieces out there. You can look at how he analyzes the market at rosters for your DFS NFL needs. All this information you can have for under $1 a day. It does not get better than that. Now, if you haven't checked out RotoCurve in a little while, you haven't seen it this week or anything, you haven't seen the banner, which is an excellent promo we have going right now. If you look at it, you can win 2 tickets and a full experience to the big game. Check it out on rotocurve.com/big-game. You get 4 nights in Houston, 2 tickets to the big game, VIP tickets to the Antonio Brown celebrity game, for pregame parties, tailgates, airfare, all sorts of stuff included. So please be sure to check that out. There's no risk right now. You can go at it and look at it. Literally, you just have to enter your email, and you have a chance to win that huge package of the big game. So please be sure to consider doing so. This has been First and Goal for Week 11, as always, presented by Rosters.com. That's Adam Pfeiffer. I'm Josh Kalachi. Good luck this week, and let's win some Buckies.